Hi, I'm Eric Bolling in for Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching this special edition of The Factor, the Trump Agenda. Let's get straight to our top story. President Trump's first 50 days. It's been a whirlwind start for the administration, to say the least. And with us now, counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. So, Kellyanne, let's start with some of the, I guess, the pressing thing of the week was the Obamacare bill, the rollout. What's going on? Where do you see it? Where does the president see it?
The president's very confident that he's going to repeal and replace Obamacare the way he promised during the campaign. And I love the fact that this is the first major legislative action while he's been president. Most of it's been executive in nature. And you really see Donald Trump, the negotiator, the decision maker, the deal maker, the great listener. He's been receiving different members of Congress and senators into the Oval Office, into the White House. He's also been working the phones with them. Vice President Pence is on the Hill pretty much every day. Secretary Price, Director Mulvaney at OMB. So it's been a full court press, but it's also really a House and Senate bill. So we know it's going to come out in three prongs. We want people to know that it will be much improved. You're getting rid of those mandates, penalties, et cetera, containing the costs.
I think the big question is he willing to negotiate with the Freedom Caucus? Clearly the House needs the Freedom Caucus to get that bill through the House and then onto the Senate. Will he negotiate? Or Paul Ryan seems to be fairly rigid on this is it, take it or leave it.
Well, the president's a great negotiator and great listener. This is primarily the plan, but he's been very open this week to listening to people's concerns and their considerations, their best practices, and he's been incredibly open-minded and giving an olive branch to many of them. He'll be the ultimate decision maker here. But I would point out to you, Eric, we're really heartened by the fact that in Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means, the bill passed with unanimous Republican support. That's 54 Republicans, including some House Freedom Caucus members. So when they had to actually put it to a vote and not just be on TV or on Twitter, they are supportive of it. We also would just point out that this has been an entitlement for 7 years. Some people live under it and like it, and the president has promised them a smooth transition. He's promised to them that they maybe can continue with the exchanges as they are. But for the vast majority of Americans, they want something more patient-centric and free market. They want these penalties and mandates and taxes gone. They want health savings accounts. They want, which will happen in prong 3, getting the drug pricing under control. They want the interstate mobility of health care where you can buy and sell it across state lines. So everything he's promised to do is part of this.
I want to get to, we have so much to talk to. I want to get to this. I know there's a lot. We can go on for hours on all this stuff. But the Trump Tower wiretaps. Now, this has been all over the board. First they said there were no wiretaps, then they say there were wiretaps, then it wasn't ordered by President Obama, former President Obama. Where's the administration right now? Was Trump Tower wiretapped?
What President Trump has asked for and received is for the House and Senate Intelligence Committees to add to their existing investigation this piece of it, and they've agreed to do that. So we will wait until that oversight and those investigations are complete, and then we'll have further comment.
Okay, so he's not saying that it was, I mean, look, I remember a New York Times front page on January 20th using the word wiretap about the Trump Tower or someone at Trump Tower and sending that information back to President Obama.
Well, Eric, we know there are many ways to surveil people now, and you had reports of that just this week. I would note, because the really frustrating part are all the leaks coming from intelligence and security sources, and so that's really the frustration here that the president talks about frequently. And the day after his widely heralded, very successful joint session to Congress, the New York Times ran a story the very next day talking about how members of the Obama administration rushed to preserve and sprinkle around the government these intelligence information. That is not a partisan issue. That's about national security and intelligence, and it affects all of us. And so the president also has that very much on his mind. But when it comes to this particular issue, he has called for an investigation. It seems like that will be underway as part of an existing investigation, and we'll await the findings.
If it turns out that Valerie Jarrett was the one who suggested to Attorney General Loretta Lynch that maybe an investigation or a wiretap would be a good idea, I mean, what's the difference if it's Valerie Jarrett or President Obama asking for it? It still came from the upper levels of the Obama administration.
I don't want to answer hypotheticals, and I certainly don't want to with specific people's names involved in the hypotheticals. But let me just say that Kevin Lewis, who's a spokesman for President Obama, said last Saturday that it was a cardinal rule that the president and people in the White House never interfered in Department of Justice investigations. Okay, let's take that as fact for the moment. But what about the rest of the huge government? That's the point. I mean, even when Director Clapper said nothing under my purview, he couldn't close the door on everything. Director Comey at the FBI almost a week ago now said what he said, asking the DOJ to make a statement denouncing this, and yet if he's got something to say, we're willing to hear it. He's welcome to put out a statement, but we just haven't seen it. We've seen reports of it.
A little bit of controversy the last couple of weeks. President Trump gave the Communications Department a C-. Now, Sean Spicer's had a little bit of a rough time at times in front of the press. Does Sean Spicer have the president's full confidence?
Yes, he does. And in fairness, the president told your colleagues here at Fox that he would give himself an A on substance on the issues, and we all should. 235,000 jobs created in his first full month, including in manufacturing, construction, unemployment at 4.7%, economic confidence up. The markets love this presidency. But the president said he'd give himself an A on substance and issues, and he'd give a C or C- on communication of it. And then he said, he thinks he could do a better job. I think, meaning we all could, he meant all of us. I think Donald Trump is his own best spokesperson. We all agree when he gets out there, when he does a press conference, when he addresses the joint session of Congress, when he goes to CPAC, when he has the rally in Melbourne, Florida, it is the best way to communicate and connect with people directly. I've never seen a more brilliant communicator and more natural connector than Donald Trump. I think it's in large part how he got elected and cut through the noise and the silence. And so in the White House, I've been the loudest voice for having the president and vice president out there more, our cabinet secretaries. Sean Spicer does a daily briefing under very tough circumstances. I think he does a tremendous job. The president, I'm present when the president is routinely commending the job he's doing. He knows he's under. We all know that we're also representing the president, and we all know that the media can be really rough on the president. We think that they're often unfair. We think that they're often incomplete in their coverage. But it's a two-way street, and we hope that it improves. I'm very pro-press. I hope it improves because we need to have a fair and free press in this country. But we also need the President of the United States to be shown respect.
I'd like you to comment on the travel ban, the new executive order for the travel ban. It looks like it's going to be, again, pushed back. Several states looking like they're going to mount a challenge to it. Your thoughts?
We anticipated several states would challenge it legally, but this travel ban will pass legal muster. It has a new effective date of March 16th, next week, and Iraq is no longer on the list, and I think it's a great signal as to how to get yourself off the list. There are 6 countries on the list. These are all countries that have they either harbor, train, or export terrorists. They can't prove that they are not ridden by terrorists. Some of them are failed states, but all of them were put on a list earlier by President Obama and the Congress. And this president, I think that Secretary of State Rex Tillerson and Secretary Kelly and others have worked with, as I understand, have worked with Iraq to find a way to get a better policy moving forward in reporting and in vetting so that Iraq is now off the list. The other thing executive order does is make very clear that legal permanent residents, those with green cards, Eric, those who have proper travel and visa documentation are not covered by this travel halt. They are fine. Also,
that was the one issue that the Ninth Circuit was hung up on.
That's right. It was always true that they were exempt from this, but it wasn't made clear, perhaps. And so that's something that from the get-go here. Also, Syrian refugees are treated along with all refugees, and instead of there being religious persecution exceptions, anybody can apply under undue hardship. So there are some significant changes, and we know it'll pass legal muster.
We've got some really good news. Kellyanne is going to stick around for more to cover. So when we're going to be right back later in the show with Kellyanne. So sit there, sit tight, and everyone be sure to stick around for that. But next on this O'Reilly Factor special, Congress duking it out over replacing and repealing Obamacare. Senator Rand Paul joins us with his predictions on the final outcome moments away. In the Impact segment tonight, the fight over health care. House Speaker Paul Ryan is leading the charge to repeal and replace Obamacare, despite mounting resistance from the left and even some conservatives on how to do it. Today, President Trump is making clear where he stands in the battle.
I want every American to know that action on Obamacare is an urgent necessity. House Republicans have put forward a plan that gets rid of this terrible law and replaces it with reforms that empower states and consumers. The House plan follows the guidelines I laid out in my recent address to Congress, expanding choice, lowering costs, and providing health care access for all.
Joining us now with reaction from Washington, Senator Rand Paul of Kentucky. Welcome, Senator. Thanks for joining us tonight. Big night.
Thanks.
Senator, you heard that address that President Trump laid out. He said that the House plan lays out his plan as well. Now, I understand you spoke to the president recently. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, you know, I've been out there saying that the House plan is Obamacare light, and the president called and wanted to discuss that with me. I got very much the impressions, or sort of a different impression from the president than I'm getting from Paul Ryan. Paul Ryan gave a 45-minute press conference in which he said that the choices are binary, which basically means you can either take what he's offering or keep the status quo. I think from the president, I'm hearing that he's much more open to negotiation. Conservatives across the land do not like Paul Ryan's proposal because it is Obamacare light. It keeps the subsidies, keeps the taxes, keeps the mandate, and actually has an insurance company bailout in it. We don't like it. We never have liked Obamacare. Obamacare is a disaster, but the only thing that's really united us over time is repeal. And if Obamacare light is a replacement, conservatives aren't going to accept it.
I want to talk about that in a second, but earlier you had said that, quote, Paul Ryan is trying to, quote, pull the wool over the president's eyes. Why do you think the speaker is lying to the president?
I wouldn't put it that he's lying. What I would say is that Paul Ryan, I think, has presented something to the president that it's a slam dunk, and my plan, everybody loves it. Paul keeps telling us all that we ran on it, but I just ran for election. I didn't run on Paul Ryan's plan of Obamacare light. In fact, I think most conservatives across the country didn't run on Obamacare light. So I think that is misrepresenting it to the president. I think there's a lot that we agree on. We agree on repeal, but we do not agree on replace, and that's why I keep saying, why don't we separate repeal from replace? Let's vote on the repeal we voted on a year ago, and then let's vote on replacement same day, but just a different bill.
Okay, so let's talk about that. So let's say you do get the House and then send it over to the Senate to just repeal Obamacare. Doesn't that leave a lot of people in the lurch wondering if they're going to have health care going forward?
Well, that's why I would vote the same day on replacement. The only reason I'm saying separate them is that I don't think all Republicans agree on replacement. I don't think Republicans and Democrats agree on replacement. So if you give us several varieties, let's vote on Paul Ryan's Obamacare light. Let's vote on the conservative version, which would be market repeal or market reforms. And then let's let the Democrats have a proposal as well. Maybe we have 4 or 5 different replacements and that we come to some coalition or coalescing where some replacement can pass. But no, I'm still for voting on both on the same day. I just think they need to be in a separate bill.
Well, forgive me, but I'm confused. So if you do repeal and you haven't basically come to an agreement on the replacement, again, don't you risk many, many months, perhaps, before a replacement bill is actually acceptable to everyone, the Freedom Caucus and the more establishment Republicans?
No, I think the debates can occur simultaneously, and I really think the votes can occur simultaneously. So, for example, if we're going to have to debate a long time on replacement, let's debate. Let's bring them to the floor. Let's have amendments. Let's have votes. And let's vote, though, on the final passage on both repeal and replacement on the same day. Republicans have some great ideas on replacement. Some of these I agree with Paul Ryan on. For example, letting individuals join a co-op or a buying group or what we call association health plans. This will guarantee issue, meaning that you won't be excluded if you're already sick or have a pre-existing condition. But it does something that no other plan does so far. It gives you the leverage to get a cheaper price. Right now, my fear is if you pass the Obamacare light proposal, the individual price of insurance premiums is going to continue to skyrocket. That is my fear. I don't want any part of Obamacare, and so I'm not going to vote for Obamacare light because I think it still increases or allows the prices to still continue to rise.
All right, Senator Paul, thank you very much for joining us tonight.
Thanks, Eric.
Up next, how much is President Trump's agenda being damaged by the relentless flow of leaks and investigations in Washington? Then later, more with counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. The Factor will be right back. In the Factor follow-up segment tonight, reaction from the other side to our interviews with Kellyanne Conway and Senator Rand Paul. Joining us now from Washington, Democratic Congressman Brad Sherman, who is also a senior member of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. Welcome, Congressman. First of all, did you listen to these interviews and your thoughts? Especially, let's talk a little bit about the health care and what you're hearing from Rand Paul from the Freedom Caucus saying, I'm not so sure I'm ready to sign on to Paul Ryan's plan.
Well, it sounds like what Rand Paul wants to do is repeal and not replace. He's saying the Republicans can't agree on what to replace Obamacare with. If they can't, they're not going to be getting Democratic votes for a repeal and replace program. So if they don't agree on a replacement and they go ahead with repeal, that's repeal and repeal. I'd like to see repeal and republish, or better yet, not repeal at all.
Or maybe those on the left are hoping that Obamacare sticks around for a while.
Well, absolutely. What we've seen since Obamacare was adopted is 16 million new private sector jobs at a time when employers were required to provide health coverage. Now, under all the Republican proposals, employers don't have to provide health coverage, and many of them won't. And what you saw before Obamacare was fewer and fewer employers were providing health coverage. Most Americans get their health coverage through their employer, and if you take away that employer mandate,
the only problem with that theory is, and it's not just theory going forward, Obamacare literally is collapsing from within itself because they backloaded some of the costs so it didn't look so expensive up front. Well, some of these bills are coming due now, this year, next year, and 2019, 2020.
Obamacare is working quite well, and you have the majority of Americans getting their health coverage from their employer because employers are required to provide it.
Yeah, but insurers are pulling out of the system. Next year there could be, I don't know, 5 or 6 states with only one insurer, and then maybe down the road there may be no one to insure these people.
The majority of Americans get their policies through their employer, and
right,
employers have
those
dozens of
the Democrats
choices.
are all worried about the 15 or 20 million people who they say are covered under Obamacare who don't get insurance from their employer. If insurers say we can't afford to do this anymore, you're going to have no health care for those people.
Well, certainly under the Republican plan, you're not going to have many insurance companies, probably none, because people aren't required to have the insurance until they get their cancer diagnosis. So who's going to sell insurance at any reasonable price to a pool that like that? Obamacare is working well. We have an all-time high level of coverage, and the vast majority of people are getting that coverage through their employer. And if you take away the employer mandate, they're not going to have that coverage. And you're talking about tens and tens of millions of Americans.
I want to pivot a little bit to Kellyanne Conway's interview. She talked somewhat about the leaks and the investigations going on. Your thoughts from the left of what's going on at Trump Tower, what went on, during the October, November, December timeframe.
Well, this wiretap charge comes out of thin air. It's part of the Trump approach of ready, shoot, aim. He announces and declares that Obama is sick or bad because Obama had his Trump Tower bugged, and then says, I don't have any evidence that it was bugged at all, but let's have an investigation. That's absolutely absurd.
Congressman, someone tapped the Trump Tower. Someone was going after some information from the Trump Tower.
If you read Breitbart, yeah, but there's certainly no evidence.
I read the New York Times. That's where I read. And January 20th, clearly on the front page, they said there was a wiretap to Trump Tower and that President Obama was notified of it.
I'm certainly not aware of that.
You know who wrote that? By the way, you know the author of that piece was Michael Schmidt, the same guy who exposed Hillary Clinton's private email server.
You can cite an individual article. The fact is that if Trump had proof that the Obama administration had bugged him, he would produce that proof. Instead, first he makes the charge, then he calls for the investigation. What we need is a special counsel or special prosecutor to look as to whether there was coordination between the Trump campaign and Russia.
Do you have proof? I mean, the Democrats have said, there's proof that the Russians coordinated with Donald Trump.
No, there is no proof.
I haven't seen proof of that either, and I'm hearing a lot of that accusation flying as well.
That's why you need the investigation. And if you want an investigation of both charges, fine. Let's have a special counsel investigate both Trump's charge. But the thing is, in real life, when you see somebody benefit from a theft, they usually had something to do with the thief. So there's a reason to do the investigation. Let's have an investigation,
I think
but
that's
let's
what
not
they're calling
announce
for,
charges
Congressman.
before the investigation.
I think that's what President Trump was calling for, investigation on both of these charges.
It's got to be
do this.
independent. It's got to be a special counsel.
I'm going to leave it right there. Thank you, Congressman, for joining us tonight. Directly ahead, President Trump versus the deep state government bureaucracy in Washington. Why the White House believes there's a concerted effort to undermine the Trump administration. Stay tuned. In the Unresolved Problems segment tonight, is the Washington bureaucracy aligned against President Trump? White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer squared off with reporters over that issue today.
Does the White House believe there's such a thing as the deep state that's actively working to undermine the president?
Well, I think that there's no question when you have 8 years of one party in office that there are people who stay in government, affiliated with, joined and continue to espouse the agenda of the previous administration. So I don't think it should come as any surprise that there are people that burrowed into government during 8 years of the last administration and, may have believed in that agenda and can want to continue to seek it. I don't think that should come as a surprise to anyone.
Joining us now to analyze from Palm Springs, California, Rick Grinnell, former spokesman for the U.S. ambassador to the UN, and from Washington, former State Department official David Teferi. Rick, start with you. The deep state. I mean, look, we know there are a lot of Obama hangovers still in Trump, in the Trump administration, in the building. But are they? Is it a concerted conspiracy effort to undermine Donald Trump, you think?
Well, look, whatever you want to call it, a deep state, the media try to make this mocking term. The simple fact is that Donald Trump campaigned on a policy difference from where the direction of the government was going. And I think that democracy now demands that he must implement exactly what he promised. Anyone who is trying to subvert Donald Trump's policy positions at this point, who is also employed by the federal government, is really the one who is trying to subvert democracy. They are the ones who are trying to stand in the way of what the American people voted for. I mean, look, it was President Barack Obama who famously said, elections have consequences. So I don't think Republicans are trying to be mean-spirited. We're certainly not trying to just push people out. But no one should be surprised that an Obama political appointee doesn't get to work for a change in government and a change in direction and policy.
Right. Rick, let me cut you off a little bit here. David, here's the issue, though. When there are leaks, and there are a lot of leaks coming out of D.C. right now, it goes beyond just being a deep state undermining campaign to could be illegal. I mean, first of all, WikiLeaks has got their hands on thousands of documents that are very damaging. That came from a leak, not from WikiLeaks. Someone leaked that to them.
There are certainly holdovers from the previous administration into this administration, and some of them may not agree with Donald Trump. But to suggest that there's some sort of deep state conspiracy that they're organizing together to oppose our state is pure paranoia, and we shouldn't be talking about that because there's absolutely no evidence, and it's really, really unconstructive. The mistakes that the Trump administration has made so far have been their fault.
But David, who's leaking? Who's leaking the alleged Trump dossier? Who's leaking the CIA leaks to WikiLeaks? I mean, who's leaking the wiretap to the Trump Tower? These are all leaks that have occurred from somewhere within there.
The Trump dossier came from a British former intelligence agent, so it didn't come from the U.S. government. There are some leaks,
but how
there
do we find out about it?
There are leaks in every administration.
Oh, not like this.
And you talk about WikiLeaks, but WikiLeaks has been a provocateur and agent of Russia, which the Trump administration was at least communicating with when they were releasing information that was intended to interfere with the election. So what I think we should all take a deep breath and look at what the evidence is. There have been some mistakes by the Trump administration, but the mistakes are their own. For instance, take the executive order.
Let me bring Rick in. Hold on, David, let me bring Rick in.
That's not true at all. That's not true at all. Look, no one should be surprised that the bureaucracy is liberal. I've actually never heard anyone argue that the Washington, D.C. federal government bureaucracy is not liberal. David would be the first person who has ever argued in favor of that. But the political appointees is quite another issue. If you are a political appointee of Barack Obama, it's not mean-spirited to say that you are done on the day that Donald Trump comes into office. That is not, shouldn't be a problem for anyone. And by the way, the media are not going to help us because they benefit from the leaks from the liberal bureaucracy. Again, we're not trying to be mean-spirited. We're trying to face reality. Donald Trump won. Elections have consequences. Political appointees should all be from Donald Trump and conservatives.
Okay, all right. So Rick, let me ask you this, Rick. Let me stay with you for a second then. Now, what do they do? What are they still doing there? You know, Donald Trump famously used to say in those events, he'd say, "Get them out of here. Get them out." Well, get these guys out.
Well, look, any appointees that are still there because the Trump administration has not yet replaced them, and the Trump administration will replace them. But I was at the State Department this morning. Most of the political appointees have been removed. Most of the top echelon of people under Secretary of State Tillerson have been removed. You know, Rick, I didn't say that the bureaucracy in Washington doesn't tend to be liberal. It does. But what I said is that they are not engaged in a deep conspiracy to oppose our government. And for you to say otherwise is really misleading. And I don't think the American people will be misled.
I don't think
you're going to go in.
I don't think
you're going to go in, and you're an appointee
look, David,
to be
an ambassador
to
it's
NATO, and for you to take those types of views into government is very dangerous, and it's not constructive.
No, David, listen. No, dial that back. No one is saying that these individuals are meeting together. That's your words. That's actually conspiracy theorists. What we're just saying is that they're innately liberal, innately against the Trump administration. That's not new news.
All right,
but you're calling them a deep state,
and that's what
dictators do in foreign countries.
Very much. When this special edition of the O'Reilly Factor continues, Bill Clinton coming out of seclusion to take a shot at President Trump, and later we'll have much more with counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. Don't miss it. Thanks for staying with us for this special edition of the O'Reilly Factor, The Trump Agenda. I'm Eric Bolling in for Bill O'Reilly, and in the personal story segment tonight, the Clintons and President Trump. Bill and Hillary Clinton have been largely MIA since the election, but Bill Clinton made a rare public appearance yesterday and taking what sounds like a not so thinly veiled shot at President Trump.
People who claim to want the nation state are actually trying to have a pan-national movement to institutionalize separatism and division within national borders all over the world. It's like we're all having an identity crisis at once. And it is the inevitable consequence of the economic and social changes which have occurred at increasingly rapid pace.
Joining us now with reaction from Washington, Kristen Soltis Anderson, columnist for the Washington Examiner, along with Simon Rosenberg, president of the center-left think tank NDN. Kristen, we'll start with you. You know, you listen to that. First of all, deconstruct that comment for us, will you?
Well, I think that the last piece of what he said there, where he talks a lot about how there has been economic and cultural change, and that is what is causing a lot of this friction and division, I think, oddly enough, that's actually the most correct piece of what he said, and explains much more than some kind of pan-national attempt at a movement to divide people, to explain why people are feeling the way they're feeling. Look, if you have been somebody who, say, holds evangelical Christian beliefs, you've been told your beliefs, you need to get with the times, you are a relic of the past. If you're somebody that worked in a blue-collar job, you've been told, look, the job you've been doing, you're a relic of the past, you need to get with the times. Donald Trump succeeded because he said, look, you don't need to get with the time needs to get with you. And I think that's what's been causing frustration, not just here in the U.S., but around the world, where people are frustrated with elites, they feel like the system has failed them, and that anxiety is leading to leaders that say things kind of similar to Donald Trump gaining traction in countries around the world.
All right, Simon, there are two types of nationalism. The one type that you can think of the ethnic cleansing of the past, but there's the other type, and I think the Trump administration has pointed out that that's what they're talking about, the financial, the economic nationalism. That's what they're going for.
Well, I think it's very important to realize that, you know, part of the whole story of America was that great virtuous war that we fought in World War II and the world that we built afterwards. But what came before World War II was a period of rising nationalism in Europe that led
but
to
that's
the
prior type of nationalism that I'm pointing out.
But I don't agree with what you're saying. I don't agree with what you're saying. The distinction doesn't really exist. I mean, there is nationalism. I know you're trying to create a distinction. I don't see it that way.
Was Brexit nationalism? Was Brexit anti-globalism, pro-nationalism?
Yes, it was. And
well,
so I think no, but look, you make this distinction. All that Bill Clinton was saying, and I think it's a reasonable observation, that the last time the West went through a period where many countries were moving in the same direction towards nationalism, it led to the greatest world war in human history and tens of millions of deaths. I think this is a fair admonition that as we move in this era, that the last time we tried this, it didn't work work out so well.
Okay, and Kristen, and do you think that that's what this is all about? This neo-nationalism, which in the past has meant something different from what it means today. Brexit, our populist new president, Donald Trump.
Well, look, there are a lot of folks in Europe right now who are feeling very insecure. They're feeling very unsettled. And as Simon pointed out, there have been times in human history where when the population feels unsettled, feels unsafe, that can be channeled in a very negative direction. But I don't think it means it has to necessarily always be channeled in a negative direction. I don't think we're there yet. And I think if you're somebody who lives in a country like France, and you've seen an awful lot of immigration, you've seen your country take in an awful lot of refugees, you may think it'd be lovely for us to do that, but it can create anxiety if people suddenly look around their communities and they feel like this doesn't look like the place I grew up. And I think that anxiety, it can be channeled in ugly ways for sure, but I don't think it necessarily always has to mean that. If instead people are saying, I just want to feel a connection to the other people that are in my country, I want us to have shared values and shared culture.
All right, guys, I got to leave right there. Simon, I'm sorry I cut you off a little bit too short. Sorry about that. Simon, Kristen, thank you very much.
It's okay, Eric.
Coming up, a crucial week in Washington for the Trump administration. 2 top political reporters join us for its impact on the president's agenda. Back in a moment. In the Second Factor follow-up segment tonight, the biggest impact stories of the week. Joining us now to analyze from Boston, James Pindle, the political reporter for the Boston Globe, and from Washington, Aaron McPike, White House correspondent for the Independent Journal Review. Okay, Aaron, we'll start with you. Your biggest story of the week.
Well, Eric, I have to admit that I was wrong last week when I thought it was going to be the investigation into the Russia connection. Instead, it was healthcare. Bob Cusack, who was on with me from the Hill, he was right. I think this rollout was a huge deal, in part because we've seen a lot of chaos over the last 2 months for coming from the White House, and there was a lot more coordination between both the White House and House Republicans on the rollout throughout the entire week. Now, it also showed the fissures in the Republican Party that they're going to have over tax credits and rolling back the Medicaid expansion. But we also saw the president try to woo those conservatives rather than just make demands. And I think we saw them being a little bit more nimble on the messaging as they admitted later in the week that they had to do a better job communicating, even to rank and file Republicans, on how the process would work.
Nimble on the messaging, James. I guess that lines up a little bit with your big story of the week.
That's right. On one level, obviously, I don't disagree at all with what Aaron mentioned. The health care bill was a very big deal, along with the revised travel ban. But on another level, let's not lose sight of the different Donald Trump that we saw this week. We've known him for decades as this loud and almost brash and blunt sort of person, and then personality, and then a politician. You know, many people, when he began running for president, they liked him because they said that he said things that was on their mind that they were too scared to say themselves. But this week we saw a kinder and a quieter Donald Trump. You know, on Monday he had 0 public appearances. If you look at his Twitter feed, he was very much on message, talking about jobs numbers or the International Women's Day, or even, my goodness, praising Rand Paul. And then, of course, throughout the week, as Aaron hinted, they're talking about the health care bill. He met privately with Lindsey Graham. He then met, obviously, Marco Rubio and his wife.
The kinder, gentler, softer Donald Trump is your big story of the week. You know, it kind of blows my mind a little bit, you guys. I'll start with Aaron. Healthcare, travel ban, wiretaps. We're not talking about wiretaps. I found that as a big story, Aaron.
I think that's right. Now, I would point out that throughout the week at all of the press briefings, you saw Sean Spicer get very animated talking about healthcare. It was clear that that was supposed to be the message of the week. He didn't really want to talk about much else. They brought out the Obamacare bill, the 1,800 pages or so, and then the 123 pages of the House Republicans bill. I mean, this was supposed to be the message of the week, and I think they nailed it in terms of getting some of the stories that they wanted.
Okay, what about James? Your thoughts on the wiretap?
Well,
Man,
look, I mean, this
big news.
Yeah,
big
this goes to the whole central, the way you even frame this, and what Aaron said goes to the central question about this early days of the Trump presidency. Will he be able to get out of his own way? And we obviously last weekend he tried a distraction with the wiretapping, and then we got out of his own way and was beginning to govern this week. I think it was a very important moment in the Trump presidency.
Aaron, how is Spicer doing?
You know, I think I've known Sean Spicer for a long time, and I think that he is doing his best with obviously a very tough situation. What I was pointing out there is that when there is a message that he wants to drive, he is really good at that. What I have noticed is when there are topics that he doesn't want to talk about, he shies away. We've seen him deflect a lot when it comes to foreign policy and national security. He says often, I will refer you to the Department of Defense or the Department of State. So we're seeing that Spicer, like the president, was wanting to push those issues out to the other parts of the administration.
And James, former White House spokesman Josh Earnest today said that the media is too thin-skinned. Do you agree with him?
I think in a lot of ways they are. And at this point, I think we saw something from John Roberts from Fox this week say that it's time for the media to stop whining and start to do their jobs. I think he's probably right on that.
You know what I'm looking forward to, Aaron? Next week when Angela Merkel comes and meets Donald Trump at the White House and the press conference after, I'm hoping it's a big one, robust one. I'm looking forward to that.
I hope so, too. It's a situation where generally the German press will get 2 questions, the American press will get 2 questions. It might not be a very involved press conference, but we did have a reporter ask Sean Spicer earlier in the week if Donald Trump would do a separate press conference like he did a couple of weeks ago because, as James mentioned, we haven't heard very much from the president this past week.
Okay, James, last thought. I got about 20 seconds. Go.
Well, after the quiet week, he's going to have a big rally next week in Nashville, so maybe the quiet's going to be over for a little bit.
And by the way, let's not forget, Vice President Mike Pence goes to Kentucky, and they're going to spread out the country, start selling their health care bill, see if they can get that one done. James and Aaron, thank you very much. Straight ahead, Counselor to President Trump, Kellyanne Conway, rejoins us in the No Spin Zone. Don't go away. In the Back of the Book segment tonight, rejoining us now, Counselor to the President, Kellyanne Conway. Now, Kellyanne, let's get straight to President Trump's high-stakes meeting with German Chancellor Angela Merkel set for Tuesday. Yes. What's that all about?
We're very excited to welcome her to the White House. These are 2 leaders who will get to know each other, forge, I think, a very positive relationship, perhaps talk about NATO, perhaps talk about TTIP. What they can do together as 2 nations that have many common interests around the globe.
Are they going to talk about immigration, perhaps?
They may.
I mean, because that's really the elephant in the room is that Angela Merkel allowed up to 1 million refugees, and now she may have regrets about that. Maybe she can give President Trump a little advice on maybe not going so aggressive with that.
Or vice versa. And President Trump has stated his position on that publicly in the past. But I'll leave it to these 2 leaders, Eric, whether they will talk about that publicly or whether they will address that privately. But obviously, we'll have a press conference as well.
You mentioned NATO. Now, Germany is one of the NATO countries that may be underperforming on their obligation to finance NATO.
Some people see it that way. So we were, I think today in a briefing to the press, a senior administration official indicated that the president is heartened to hear that he can discuss that particular issue surrounding NATO. And anyway, we're very excited that she's coming, and we're very excited this is probably the 5th or so visit from a foreign leader since he's been president. Obviously, he's spoken to dozens of others, but these bilateral visits are very important. And he's talked about trade deals. He's talked about how important it is to have bilateral trade deals. You know, he took this country out of TPP to the pleasure of many American workers who felt like it was a bad deal for them. But he's made very clear that he entertains the ability to do fair trade deals.
Okay, so it's Friday. Tomorrow's Saturday. What happens on Saturday at 11:30 Eastern? What happened? The SNL, a lot of people are wondering, what's your reaction to the SNL skits?
Oh, it depends. I see some of them. Oh, there we are. I'm usually asleep by the time they come on, I confess, but I see some of them. I think most of them are good-humored. Most of them, what is my reaction about me? I thought that the Kellyanne Conway's Day Off was truly funny and spectacular in its accuracy in terms of how I how every woman out there who's got kids in a busy life tries to squeeze in every moment at the grocery store with the kids in the backyard, doing a little exercise with friends, etc. But anyway, we don't really, we know what we're doing in the White House. We know the difference between fact and fiction. But I think the ones that are good-humored and good-natured are great. I think the ones that are a little bit bit more dark and spookier and
does the
accurate.
president see him? Does he get a kick out of him?
Well, he has stated what he thinks of them this year. I'm really happy that someone who's 15 years younger than me is playing me. That makes me very happy, frankly. I'm not getting any younger, so thank you, Kate McKinnon. Perhaps we'll meet at some point.
And how's Spicer like spicy? Is he all right with it?
Well, listen, if you work in this White House, you are of good humor and good nature and very focused and very serious when you need to be. But Sean Spicer, he's a guy who's very comfortable with himself and what the job he's doing as press secretary, as we all are. But we all know how to laugh. We all know how to take a joke.
All right, Kellyanne, we're going to leave it right there and say thank you very much for joining us for two big segments tonight. And a quick reminder, be sure to check out a brand new Contributing Factor podcast up today, focusing on the threat from the brutal Central American gang MS-13. You can download the podcast on BillO'Reilly.com or iTunes. And as always, don't forget to catch my show Cashing In, airing 11:30 a.m. Eastern tomorrow morning right here on Fox News Channel. Again, thanks for watching this special edition of the O'Reilly Factor, the Trump Agenda. I'm Eric Bolling, in for Bill O'Reilly, who will be back on Monday. And please remember, the spin stops right here because we're looking out for you. Hi, I'm Eric Bolling, in for Bill O'Reilly. Thanks for watching this special edition of The Factor, the Trump Agenda. Let's get straight to our top story. President Trump's first 50 days. It's been a whirlwind start for the administration, to say the least. And with us now, counselor to the president, Kellyanne Conway. So, Kellyanne, let's start with some of the pressing thing of the week was the Obamacare bill, the rollout. What's going on? Where do you see it? Where does the president see it?
The president's very confident that he's going to repeal and replace Obamacare the way he promised during the campaign, and I love the fact that this is the first major legislative action while he's been president. Most of it's been executive in nature, and you really see Donald Trump, the negotiator, the decision maker, the deal maker, the great listener. He's been receiving different members of Congress and senators into the Oval Office, into the White House. He's also been working the phones with them. Vice President Pence is on the Hill pretty much every day. Secretary Price, Director Mulvaney at OMB. So it's been a full court press, but it's also really a House and Senate bill. So we know it's going to come out in three prongs. We want people to know that it will be much improved. You're getting rid of those mandates, penalties, et cetera, containing the costs.
I think the big question is he willing to negotiate with the Freedom Caucus? Clearly the House needs the Freedom Caucus to get that bill through the House and then on to the Senate. Will he negotiate? Or Paul Ryan seems to be fairly rigid on this is it, take it or leave it.
Well, the president's a great negotiator and great listener. This is primarily the plan, but he's been very open this week to listening to people's concerns and their considerations, their best practices, and he's been incredibly open-minded and giving an olive branch to many of them. He'll be the ultimate decision maker here. But I would point out to you, Eric, we're really heartened by the fact that in Energy and Commerce and Ways and Means, the bill passed with unanimous Republican support. That's 54 Republicans, including some House Freedom Caucus members. So when they had to actually put it to